Sound check, 1 2 3, 1 2 3, sound check, testing, sound check.
When we were stationed.
Morning. Good morning. If we can just request everyone to take their seats so that we can start with our meeting. Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. You are all welcomed. Let me take this opportunity to greet members of Parliament of the Portfolio Committee, and also greet the deputy ministers, the DG, and officials that are here, and members of the media. Thank you very much. You are all welcome in this important meeting today. And we have the agenda before us. Can we just quickly get a mover and Member Mdluli moves, and then Member Msezana second. Are there any apologies?
Chair, we have an apology from Mr. Beasley and Mr.
Njingila.
Yes, Chair. Those are the only two, and Ms. Siati will be joining us late, and other members will be joining us through the course of the meeting, Chair. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, I'm also informed that the minister is on his way, so he will join us. Thank you very much, colleagues. Today we are going to be looking at the revised APP as discussed over the past 6 months. The committee implored the DTIC to revise its annual performance plan to ensure that the targets drive impact and change of the structure of the economy. And there are some issues that we needed for consideration. One of them was the coordination between the macroeconomic policy and industrial policy to ensure economic growth and job creation. Secondly, the focus on transformation by addressing demographics of the ownership patterns, management and control of the means of production. Thirdly, the ensuring the coordination for effective industrialization and job creation to foster inclusive economic growth. Fourthly, the evaluation of the strategic needs of its entities, their performance and the resource allocation to ensure that they are fit for purpose, and to rationalize resources and structure to enhance their efficiency and effectiveness where necessary. The industrial development corporations to revert back to its founding strategic role of supporting industrial development and economic transformation. Number 7, the consideration of alternative financing mechanism for its entities. The DTIC, we had said that should consider ring fencing of the 20% of the shares of the new national lottery operator to government, and to ensure that this is used to capitalize the NEF and other consumer protection entities, as all of them are basically underfunded. The appropriate governance and oversight framework for its entities so that there is a seamless way in which entities are managed by the DTIC. A comprehensive review of industrial park, including determining the economic viability and contribution to surrounding communities, and also issues of SEZ that they are fully ramped up and implemented by the DTIC. Prioritize the beneficiation of mineral by developing mechanism to shift from dominance of export of raw materials to exporting larger volumes of high value manufactured goods on our part. Ensuring that the state procurement as a tool for redistribution of wealth and inclusive economic transformation is prioritized, and encourage the procurement of locally manufactured products. Strengthen ties with key African countries, especially in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and strengthen support in sectors such as film industry to increase local economic activities. It is in this context that the committee will consider the revised APP for the 2024-25 financial year. The aim is to determine whether the revised performance target will result in the desired impact on the economy. I now wish to take this opportunity to invite the department through the deputy ministers who will lead the discussion to introduce and present the APP. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to the members of the Portfolio Committee. Just as setting the scene, Chair, I will share what the Minister had intended to present here this morning. So when the department revised the APP, we were to take care of not seeking to disrupt the work that's being done mid-year in the department, but in the process incorporate work that would enable us to set direction of work into the 7th administration. So this APP has been developed at a time when South Africa is facing an important inflection point. The economy has not grown strongly for over a decade, unemployment has increased, and apartheid-era spatial patterns continue to scar the economy. Underinvestment in network industries such as electricity, rail transport, and ports constrains the domestic economy and limits our export potential. A lot of the indicators that you will see there in the APP, particularly those that would have had changes, are trying to streamline work of the department to enable us to build on the agenda of the 7th administration without causing fundamental disruption to progress. So today's presentation to the Portfolio Committee sets out priorities for the remaining 4 months. In amending the APP, we're looking at the priorities of the 7th administration and also looking at the work we are doing now, which will propel us forward in having a much more rigorous APP in the following year. We view this revised APP as an APP where we are planting seeds for the next 5 years. Through the work done by the department, we can take the country forward considering the low growth trap that we are currently in. Our work seeks to address the impact of the significant long period of low growth, which was unable to absorb the labor force that we have in the country, and that on its own did not help us to deal with the societal challenges that we need to resolve. The revised APP also includes bold actions to reinvigorate broad-based black economic empowerment, including strengthened monitoring of BBBE compliance and the creation of a substantial transformation fund to address long-standing access to finance challenges for SMMEs and black-owned businesses more generally. At the same time, the DTIC will ramp up its efforts to build sustainable township industries by developing a new model for industrial parks to improve operations, financial stability, maintenance, and the services provided to generate more economic activity in the areas where the majority of our people live. Regarding the new targets in the revised APP, members of the Portfolio Committee will note that the department has improved some targets, revised a few, and in some instances removed some targets altogether. You will find that these targets that were removed were found in both the APP of the DTIC as well as in one of our entities, thereby creating duplication of targets between the department and its entities. Therefore, these removed targets from the DTIC revised APP are still contained in the tabled revised APP of entities. So what you might not see on the DTIC APP is not entirely lost in the group. It is just being articulated more focusedly in the work of the entities. So, Chairperson, that is the context of our opening, but I will allow the Deputy Minister Whitfield to say a few remarks if he has anything to say, and then we will hand it to the DG to take us through the APP. Thank you.
Chairperson, I think Deputy Minister Godlimpi has covered the views of the ministry and set out very clearly the process that has been undertaken. I would just add that the minister has dedicated an extraordinary amount of time, including both deputy ministers and the department, to ensure that we do address the request from the committee to revise the annual performance plan, and a significant amount of work has gone into trying to turn the ship around. And I believe that what we have in front of us is the beginning of a new roadmap for the next 5 years. Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Chairperson.
So the minister has arrived, but I'm still him until after the DG is done. So we'll give it to the DG now to take us through the APP itself. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, DM and both DM Godlimbi and DM Whitfield. And thank you also to the Minister and Chairperson, to yourselves, and good morning to all the honorable members and everyone that is participating here today. Chair, as DM Godlimbi and DM Whitfield had indicated, we are here to present to the committee the revised 2024-2025 annual performance plan. The DM had already indicated that the background of the changes really stem from alignment of our priorities as a department to the priorities of the 7th administration, and also the extensive discussions that were had in this committee on what the direction of change should look like. So on the I'll go through the slides. In some instances, I'll skip some, but try and give a lot more detail on the areas where we have changed. As we usually do with these presentations, we just start by first recalling what it is that we are responding to. DM Godlimbi has already indicated that we've struggled with low growth for over a decade as an economy. And what we want to respond to is actually that issue of correcting the low growth towards a growth rate that will be able to help us resolve some of the societal challenges that we know we need to resolve. We're doing it in a context that is significantly different, for example, from what was had in 1994 and the early 2000s, a context where South Africa has to find itself within the growing geopolitical tensions and protectionism. We have to still find markets for ourselves. There are trade wars, as members are aware, with a lot of countries flexing their muscles, all of them trying to protect their domestic productive capacity. We also here are still dealing with the issue that globally the demand for our products is mainly on unrefined mineral exports, although we do have a significant offering into our export basket of manufactured goods. We also are dealing with the issues of customs enforcement, regulatory oversight that allows illegal and illicit imports to enter South Africa. Why are these important? Members have already indicated in various discussions that for South Africa to grow and to grow at significant levels, we do need to augment the domestic market with international markets. So what happens internationally greatly affects us in terms of our own growth prospects. So our focus areas for the APP, we want to address the issue of the cost of doing business. We do want to deal with market structures and also demand for South Africa's exports internationally, and also domestic demand, as you would hear us again going to that issue of using government procurement as a strategic lever to induce demand for our own manufactured goods, as it's a lesson that we have learned from all over the world, where countries are industrializing and also diversifying their export provision to the rest of the world, and also ensuring that what the people in their localities consume to a large extent are what is produced in those markets. we go on to a SWOT analysis that members are fully aware of because it was in part developed out of some of the inputs that came from members. Members were saying to us that we are sitting on a minefield of opportunity. South Africans are very entrepreneurial, very creative, and we've got mineral deposits, we've got agricultural capability that is competitive even globally, and therefore we have to tap into those strengths as the basis of our growth going forward. Opportunities that over time, again, it was indicated in this house that the AfCFTA presents to us immense opportunity for us to trade more with our neighbors, like the rest of the world does, that most of trade, say in Europe, is between neighbors. Most of trade in the Americas is between neighbors. But in Africa, the trade is largely about taking things out of the continent and not allowing value to circulate within the continent. And members had said that we must make sure that we roll out the AfCFTA. You will see that we are completely in agreement with members on that issue. And we are agreeing with members that we've got a digitally savvy, youthful population that is not only a consumer of some of these apps, and they're creating these apps, and we were challenged to say, how are we supporting this improving and increasing area of opportunity? And we've also looked at it as an opportunity that this APP must seek to exploit. Then on the weaknesses, these are some of the issues that the members had said. We do need to find a place, even where the direct mandate is not with the DTIC, but we need to find a place for the DTIC to respond, because where some of these weaknesses impose an economic cost to development, the DTIC must find a way to also come in and respond. And we are indicating those there. The issues of freight and logistics, members will recall the discussions we've had, R&D and the lack of structured support for innovation, especially commercialization of that innovation. And the fact that we haven't sufficiently crowded in the private sector for investment. And then, of course, the issue we've dealt with for years, that we do want to get to a resolution of, which is the high levels of concentration and limited entry of dynamic new firms and SMMEs into our economy. And similarly, I've already spoken about the threats, that we are not an isolated part of the world, but very integrated into global value chains. And therefore what happens globally also affects us. And that the biggest area of actually inducing demand in the economy is to see how we can start dealing much more meaningfully with the illicit economy, so that we are able to give stimulus to our manufacturing sectors. So on the next slide, what we do indicate is that although we are talking about the fact that we need to move out of the low growth trap, we're doing that in the context of projections that are still showing a growth rate that is rather modest in light of challenges we need to solve for. So, for example, the National Treasury and the Reserve Bank, they are giving a modest growth rate of around 3.5, and that growth rate is conditioned on all the work that is done under Operation Vulindlela coming into fruition. We then say on the next slide that the work that we are going to present to you seeks to help us consolidate and break from the low growth trap. Again, reiterating the priorities of the 7th administration: inclusive growth and job creation, reducing poverty and tackling high costs of living, and also building a capable, ethical, and a developmental state. We share with the committee the pillars of the MTDP. Committee will recall that within government, we've got an organizing frame of the work that we do, and that is our medium-term development program, development plan. And what we do here, we just share with the committee that at a government level, these are some of the issues that we are looking at. It's a document that is still in development, not yet approved. So as we are planning here for the work of the department, we are equally planning at a national level beyond the department. And these are not parallel plans. These are actually self-reinforcing plans that we're looking at. So the work that you will see us present to you, you will see that we've got a serious bias towards diversification of the economy. That's on that next slide. And then on digitization, and then on decarbonization. Why decarbonization? Because we do have to respond to the pressure of our own export markets and our own obligation as a country to help in resolving the climate change challenges. And we see decarbonization also as an important opportunity for growth for those enterprises that are working to green our industries, produce goods and services in the green space. We'll go straight now into the different areas of focus. And let me start by saying that when you look at this APP versus the APP that we would have presented about 3 months ago, you will see that there's been some substantial reworking. And the reworking is just to make sure that there is full alignment with the priorities of the 7th administration. We've moved down from around 118 KPIs to around now 55 KPIs, because we do need to bring this into a manageable form so that we can hold ourselves accountable in ensuring its full delivery. The rest of the other KPIs are found in the next layers of planning that you'll find in the department. For example, here you are seeing what we call branch priorities. Then there will be chief director priorities and directorate priorities. And some of those priorities are there. So nothing that is critical has been lost. We just want to make sure that we've got a plan that is manageable. So I'm going to present now to the committee programmatically the focus areas of the department, and I'll start with program 1 in the department, which is about administration. And in this program, it's generally the office of the DG plus the work on corporate services and our audit work, including the work that we need to do to provide oversight and direction to the entities. And here, as you can see, we've set ourselves a target for the next couple of months, which is like the next 3 months before the financial year ends, that all vacancies that are funded will be advertised. And you would have already seen that we have started with that work. And we've set ourselves a target of ensuring that 85% is achieved of all planned targets of entities. I was in this committee and we were asked the question, do we have a benchmark? And now we've gone back, and that is a response to the committee's question to say, now we've set the standard, and all our entities can be measured on that standard. That is not a standard of just measuring KPIs. It's also a standard of measuring how each of these entities are staying true to their original mandate as contained in their founding documents. And then we set ourselves also the priority of ensuring that in the way that we procure, we don't only get goods and services, but we procure developmentally, looking at those parts of our population that were historically disadvantaged, to use this procurement to facilitate their sustainable entry into the economy. Then on the next page, what we then do is set out what is essentially in our program 2. Our program 2 focuses on trade, and you will see there that we indicate that the purpose is to build an equitable global trading system. Why don't we just say we want tariffs that are good for South Africa? Because we understand that an equitable global trading system provides sufficient enough stability to allow investors to invest in South Africa and trade using that system. So we look at that, and then we look at the tariffs as well, because we want to ensure that we can trade. And when it comes to the African continent, we want a dual mandate of not just looking at strengthening trade, but also investment links with the rest of the continent. That same point that countries that we've seen growing are growing also on the basis of sustainable trade with their neighbors. So if we do not invest in our own neighborhood, that sustainable development may continue to be elusive. We indicate therefore our core focus areas. The AFCFTA, I've already spoken to it. Development of economic interest strategies. The committee had asked us whether we are sufficiently targeted in the way that we are engaging with particular parts of the world, and this is our response, that we will be developing this in the next 3 months that are left in the financial year. And we'll also be looking at the Patents Act and Design Act to ensure that there's affordable access to key technologies, including medical products. And that is an important part of ensuring that we transform our medical sector in particular, which currently, especially for some of the pharmaceutical value chains, it's heavily dependent on imports. And we told by some of the investors that we do need to ensure that the Patents and Designs Act are aligned to current international practice, so that they will feel safe that their intellectual property will be protected, and what is registered here as a patent will also be recognized all over the world as such. So you don't have to register in South Africa and go and register in many other destinations, because our acts are slightly out of date. Then on the slide that follows, we deal with investment and spatial industrial development. That will be our program number 3. Minister, through the Deputy Minister, in making the introductory remarks, indicated that we do have an ambition to change that spatial industrial landscape that was developed through the apartheid system, that sought to leave other regions out of the mainstream of the economy. And here we are looking to mobilize 2 trillion over the next 5 years attracting investments both domestically and foreign, in greenfield and brownfield investments in our key industrial areas and also areas outside those the what we would call traditional industrial areas. You will see we are also saying that we will relook at the work that we've done on special economic zones, an issue that has been raised in this committee, to look at models that could be feasible for implementation. Here, it will be the models that we can implement, and we will take into account the views that have been raised in the committee. For example, Honorable Chance was indicating to us that we need to look at how we can see whether it's feasible to actually look at labor laws and their implementation as far as that is concerned. I'm not saying it's going to be in, I'm saying we're looking at it. We are reviewing. We also had views about whether we shouldn't turn our townships into special economic zones, into industrial areas by Honorable Webster. And we're saying we are going to be looking at that. So that review will take into account the issues that the members have raised, and we will extend it also to a new model of how we manage industrial parks. We've heard the committee on the issues of the industrial parks, and we ourselves we are aware that there are a number of those industrial parks that are not only ripe for support, but require that we change that support in a manner that responds to the requirements of the communities where they are at, and it also responds to our own national priorities. Again, under that frame of the industrial parks, I'll give you just a bit of a taster of some of the things that we are looking at. DM Godlimbi has raised with us the fact that for rural economies, if you do not create aggregation centers, it will be very difficult to sustainably bring those producers into the mainstream of the economy. And that is truth, because we have seen how rural producers have been left in the margins because they lack infrastructure, they lack market knowledge because they're so far from the market. But those are the kind of things that an aggregator brings, so that they can focus on what they are able to do, which is produce the products, while somebody comes and tells them about the look and feel, the trends, depending on the different sectors that they are in. And part of what, as we are reviewing the industrial parks, we are also looking at is how do we make them centers of aggregation, not just islands of development that have no relationship with the areas that are in. And also the criticism that we've also seen in these industrial parks, that some of them are now funeral parlors and churches, and they're performing a function for which they were not created. And this model will help in that, with dealing with that, over and above some of the governance issues that we need to resolve for. Then on the sectors branch, which is our program number 4. This is the area where we design and implement our industrial policies, and also some of the sectoral work that we need to do in order to work with the manufacturing sector in particular, and those that provide value-added services to increase value addition and competitiveness. And right here, the key focus area in the next couple of months is actually to finalize the National Industrial Policy Framework, to set it out and conclude it, to implement the different master plans. We heard the committee when you indicated to us that you do want us to roll out these master plans, and we also take on the issues that have been raised, where there's been views that in some of these master plans, the unintended consequence of the actions has been a rise in the cost of some of these products. We are looking at all of that. We're not necessarily saying we are agreeing, but we are looking at that and how these master plans can be made to work much more effectively than they've worked. Minister has already hosted a session with the coordinators, including those that were coordinating from the presidency on the master plans. So the work to upgrade the impact of these master plans is currently underway. You will see there that we also are talking about green manufacturing, green hydrogen commercialization strategy. We were just here last week or a week, 2 weeks ago, dealing with this, and the pressure that the ministry has put on us is that this green hydrogen commercialization strategy can be some work that is going to happen in 10 years. We need to bring it much sooner than our current projections, and it's because we do need to green our economy given its carbon content. Then when we move on to our program number 5, which is on regulation. Oh, but before I do that, I do need to talk to hemp and cannabis, because the members had already also raised it, that we need to also work on that. And the minister has also been given the responsibility to actually champion the work on commercialization of hemp. So that is part of the work that we will be doing in the remaining 3 months of this financial year. Then on the regulation side, the big issue there is the issue that also the committee may have noted in various discussions on e-commerce and governance of e-commerce, its implication for domestic production, and its implication for opportunities for South African manufacturers abroad. We will develop a strategy for e-commerce within the department, and part of which would be to make sure that we position South Africa to be able to take advantage of this emerging opportunity, and then work with industry to ensure that whatever risks that may arise, we are able to address those. Chair, then on the incentive front, Chair would note that what we have done there, the committee had indicated to us that they would want us to have a bias towards development of infrastructure in the manner in which we support industry. And then you will see that we've taken that into account by saying that we are going to continue funding the special economic zones and industrial parks under the new frame that I had indicated, including some of the new activities like the aggregator model that I had indicated much earlier. And then on the next slide, what we seek to do is just indicate to you some of the targets, because here we're working with funds, with money. We've also set ourselves targets on investments that we want to be able to leverage, also on global business services beyond call centers. You would recall that in one of the meetings, Minister had emphasized the point of us looking beyond call centers to other value-added services coming out of the global business services sector. And we've set ourselves a 5 billion value of export revenue that would come from that sector. And then the other area that we've been also looking at is on how we increase our efficacy when we're dealing with the private sector. DM Godlimbi makes a point about how we have to get as close to the private sector and their needs as possible. And we are responding to that through this integrated financing online web portal. And the point of this web portal is that our industrialists shouldn't be taking a lot of time filling in forms to be able to get assistance. We want them to focus on competitiveness so that they can be sustainable. And therefore, this online web portal will be of use for the IDC, the NEF, the DTIC. So for one project, you don't have to go to 3 centers. You have to go to just one. And you are locked into government, and we have to work with you to see how we can support you through whatever projects that you're presenting to us. It's another way of making the doing of business easy in South Africa. And then on the export front, I won't spend too much time on this. We did talk to it earlier on. It's on the rollout of the AFCFTA and ensuring that we are putting in place building blocks that will assist all our exporters to be confident in exporting onto the rest of the continent beyond SACU and somewhat a little bit of SADC, as has been the case now. And members would recall in that presentation that was made to yourselves on the export profile of our goods onto the continent, we had indicated some of the regions where we want to move into on the continent, and we just indicating that work, solidifying it into our APP. And on the slide that follows, what we do is just indicate to you some of the figures that we will be looking to work with industry to secure for South Africa. And the one big issue, which was also a center of discussion in the committee, was on a global export strategy, what we called the butterfly strategy. We've captured it here as one of our deliverables in the next coming couple of months. Then on our program number 8, focusing on transformation and competition, the big issue as far as transformation is concerned is a response to this issue that all of us agree on the need for transformation, but we can all agree that our economy has not sufficiently transformed. And what we have done is now put together a fund that will assist to give a little bit more oversight on what we are funding as far as transformation is concerned, and ensuring that some of these areas that require funding also find expression in the way that these funds are used. And you will see there that we've set ourselves a target of a fund, a 100 billion fund. And in this coming few months, we will be setting the architecture of that fund and beginning to set out a pipeline for that will be serviced by the fund. Then in the slide that follows, we're going towards the end, Chair. On research, the committee has also implored us to ensure that we work on evidence that is presented to us as a basis for policy making, and we agree with that, and we've even gone further. We are saying that the DTIC has to be at the center of knowledge leadership when it comes to industrialization in the country. We have to work with the best in class. We have to work with the best in class here in South Africa and abroad. You will see there that we've now set ourselves targets to publish barometers on important issues that are part of the mandate of the department on manufacturing, employment, trade, GDP, investment, and some of the economic modeling forecasts. Some of the forecasts that we have, for example, in the country, they are by nature, given the institutions that bring those out, very conservative. But in the DTIC, where we are talking about industrial policy that can be implemented for many years, that is able to unlock opportunity, we do have to have growth forecasts that actually show more ambition, more opportunity, more of what is possible than just a regurgitation of the status quo. And when we talk about these barometers, those are the type of things that we will be looking at. So it's not just going to be yet another kind of GDP estimation that, say, you'll get from Stats SA or you even get from National Treasury. This will be something that says, if we were to implement our industrial policy, where could we be? And it will help to also galvanize the whole of government and also hopefully the whole of society around some of the ambitions that we have set for ourselves. And we also are going to be producing a lot of market intelligence and trade opportunity reports, because there are many opportunities out there. There's a lot of capability in South Africa, but there is this information gap that is available. And our research branch is now putting together infrastructure to be able to, on a more sustainable basis, produce this report for society. So, Chair, those are the areas that we have sought to respond to the challenges put to us by the committee, to the priorities set by the seventh administration, and to the challenge that also the minister, the deputy ministers had put forth to us in a way that brings the DTIC work much more closer to the people to whom we are supposed to deliver these services. I'm going to ask the CFO to now come on the finance side and briefly just indicate to you for the remaining 3-4 months that we have the budget that we will be working with in order to achieve these targets that we have set out for ourselves. CFO.
Thank you, DG. Good morning, Chairperson, ministers, and everyone. If you can please move on to the next slide. Thank you, Chairperson and members. We have adjusted our budget as the DTIC. That was done through environments and shifting within the department. This was to align our budget with our priorities for the remainder of the financial year. Chair, when you look at the slide in front of you, the initial budget that we had was 9.6 billion. That has now shifted. We're now sitting with 9.67 billion. And then the difference from that, it comes from a 67.4 million that was approved by National Treasury for self-financing for the department. The self-financing comes from rental revenue that we receive from entities that are located within the DTIC campus. And then, Chair, the other part that has increased is business incentives. That amount went from 3.34 to 3.5. When you look at the changes that we have within the budget, the bulk of the changes came from this particular area, which is the DTIC business incentives. The most of it came from, there was 140 million that we reprioritized towards business incentive, global business services and film and television. And then we also had an amount of 26 million that was reprioritized to support manufacturing development incentives. This is the Black Industrialist Scheme. Chairperson, the other changes that you see within the budget, these lines here, it was mainly just to streamline the budget, to realign it with the priorities based on what the branches needed to be shifted. This budget was approved obviously through the adjustment appropriation bill. The other one which I just wanted to highlight was the membership fees that also increased. We had to top up what we paid to the International Financial Reporting standards. So that amount went up from 45.8 to 46.6 million. Chairperson, if I can then move on to the next slide. Chair, you would have seen this slide before. The overall budget still sits at 30 billion over the MTEF. We have gone through an MTEF process now. That process is not yet finalized. We're waiting for allocation letters to see if the outer years of our period will then change or shift. Just looking at the current financial year, the amount, as I said, moved to 9.67 billion. And then this pictorial that you see here, it just demonstrates the split between the different programs, with program 6 sitting with 49% of that budget. And then the second one being the sectors at 16%. And then we have transformation competition at 13%. And then administration 10%, exports at 4%, and then looking at regulation sits at 3%, and then chairperson trade and investment, they both sit at 2%, and then the last one being research at 1% at this point. Chair, on the following slide, we then break it down per program. That's the pictorial that you have seen. So the budget that you're looking at under the column that says 24-25 financial year, that is now the adjusted budget that has been approved per the adjustment appropriation bill, sitting again at 9.6 billion. And then chairperson, you would have seen this slide previously when we presented the initial APP. Our budget overall over the MTEF is still at a decline of about 0.7%. If you compare what we had in the previous financial year, we had an amount of 10.7 billion, and now we sit with 10.5 billion. We did have cuts within the budget of 3.1 billion. This was previously explained as well to the committee. And the bulk of the cuts came from the business incentives, which is program 6. And I think this also explains why the bulk of the adjustment has gone towards the incentives as well. And then chairperson, and then the economy classification just shows the split between what we have, compensation, goods and services, and so forth, including the transfers that we make to our entities, transfers that we make to our various programs. And then, Chair, that is the adjusted budget. We have realigned it and to talk to the priorities that we have for the remainder of the financial year. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, DG.
Thank you. I think, Chair, just 3 issues that the committee had raised that we do want to just assure the committee that we are looking at it. That 100 billion fund that I spoke of, we are looking at a model where the NEF will take a lot more responsibility in managing that. So this is our way of also looking to recapitalize the NEF to be much more effective in taking forward the transformation agenda than what they are able to under the kind of budget constraints that they are facing. The committee also had raised the issue of shelf space. That is the work that we are doing with the council that puts together the membership of most of the retailers. Fairly recently, I think Minister had met with Spur, and we met with this council also, and all of them are indicating their appetite to work with us to introduce new players into their environments, and how that introduction can be much more sustainable. A lot of, particularly some of the black industrialists in the agro-processing sector, were able to enter some of these retail spaces, but they were not able to stay beyond just an entry of a short time, and that's the work that we are wanting to resolve with the retailers, to make sure that there's longevity in this, and that a lot more of the players can come in using the aggregator model, create outlets for products that are produced in far-flung areas of South Africa, including those that are produced in townships. So I thought I would just add those, because these are some of the areas that the committee had indicated concern. And Chair, I think in conclusion, just to thank the committee for the guidance that you have provided in this work. We've also, in putting together this work, engaged with industry to make sure that what we are putting before you can be able to be implemented. In the context of the work that we do, industry is a partner that we can't work without. So there's broad agreement, and as we had indicated, we are laying the seeds with this plan for what will essentially be a higher growth trajectory for 2025-2026 APP. Chair, before I hand over to you, I'll maybe ask the Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable members, deputy ministers, and colleagues. I guess the DG does want to hear my voice, but because I thought the presentation has been well captured and concluded. Safe to say that, Chair, we of course did take counsel from the committee on a whole range of issues, and as we represent them, one hopes that it is evident that we did take counsel from the committee and translated those into specific programs in terms of implementation. And some of the indicators that we changed mid-year sought to ensure, as indicated when we say planting the seeds, sought to ensure that some of the programs that we might sometimes take for granted are elevated to enable us to leverage on those for purposes of growing the economy. And one typical example is in the trade area, we agreed that in fact we need to, by the end of this financial year, look at an implementation plan around trade agreements. And part of why you do that is because we've done a calculation that whilst we have entered into a number of trade agreements, we have not fully taken advantage of these trade agreements, and South African enterprises are not fully aware of the opportunities that are available in this platform. So how to ensure that it doesn't end on paper, but it's also translated. So that's an example of how we're saying we're planting the seeds for implementation into the 7th administration, whilst ensuring that there is continuity in the programs that we implement. Thanks.
Thank you very much to the Minister, Deputy Minister, and the Acting DG, and the officials, and the CFO. We will now allow the engagement. Maybe we can quickly take the 10-minute tea break so that we can then have a proper engagement when we come back. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm told that they are not ready with tea, so we might as well continue in the interest of time, because today we are very, very tight. Apologies for that logistical failure. We will now note the questions for engagement from members. Member Train, Member Msezan, Member Mdluli. Okay, so we can just go in that order. Member Train, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, let me firstly welcome the presentation. Certainly appreciate the revision of the APP and as well as the reduced focus on the targets. Like you said, if you keep on doing the same thing, expecting a different result, it is actually insanity. So the revision is welcomed. We also welcome the emphasis on beneficiation. But in the previous administration, I raised the point, and I've raised it in one of the other committee meetings, where there has to be some kind of tracking mechanism, I believe, that we need to look at introducing to actually track our progress on beneficiation. Otherwise, DG, all we have is talk. And I think, to steal some of your own words, if we just continue to talk, other nations are going to implement and leave us behind. So my question here is, will the department be looking at establishing some kind of beneficiation index, something similar to our balance of payments? You know, you look at what we export compared to what we import-export comparisons. So what we beneficiate as compared to what we just export as raw material. So that's the first question. And I think, secondly, just I have previously also warned on, and I noticed that there's the 3 Ds, diversification and so on, and one of them is decarbonization. And I think that while we have a responsibility to protecting our environment, we must not fall into the weaponized climate regulation agenda of the developed nations. I think that's just a caution. With regards to our bilateral agreements, particularly with regards to our African trading partners, former President Thabo Mbeki established the African Renaissance. But during that particular period, and even in the former administration, in the 6th administration, what was raised is that where the African nations were looking at coming together, like in SADC and so on, and looking at trading with each other, what would happen is, in the middle of some of those multilateral negotiations, trade negotiations, a developed country would come and then begin bilateral trade negotiations, and then before you know it, your whole trade deal has been scuppered amongst the African nations. So the question there is with the AF, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, what mitigating instruments are we using to prevent that from actually happening? And then, DG, have you also looked at, you spoke about, you know, best practice and lessons learned, but with regards to our SEZs and the industrial zones, but have we also looked at and taken into consideration the lessons learned from our trip to South Korea, for example, and how they were able to industrialize and turn their nation, you know, right side up economically? Particularly with regards to what they've done. I mean, almost the entire nation is like an economic zone, special economic zone, industrial zones. So have we looked at some of those lessons to implement? I think that the integrated industrial financing online web portal is a brilliant idea, but I'm just not sure. You said implemented, you know, within the 24-25. So has it been implemented, or is it still to be implemented? If it is still to be implemented, what's the timeline? If it is implemented, I think it's brilliant. I've also made, in the previous administrations indicated that I think there's a bit of a misnomer, particularly when it comes to transformation using triple BEE. And it's a misnomer or contradiction in terms particularly when one looks at its name. And I've criticized it because when one looks at the situation, the statistics in South Africa, it is far from broad. Far from broad. In fact, it is very narrow, and often it is those who are connected politically or otherwise who are the ones who become the beneficiaries, leaving the vast majority of South Africans on the sideline. Some of your private sectors, the private sector has actually done a little bit more in terms of triple BEE, where they have offered, shares at discounted prices, particularly to black individuals. So I think that one needs to look at that. And then I think in conclusion, Chair, South Africa spends some 0.7% of GDP on research and development. Our African counterparts, well, in the OECD countries, they spend 2.15%. Other nations are spending between 3 to 5%. Ours is hopelessly inadequate. And then in the presentation, I see, DG, that we are looking at the presentation in terms of the medium-term economic framework, the MTF slide. It shows that our research and development investment is going to be 1%. If we are really serious about investment, if we're really serious about growth, I think research and investment is key, and we need to look at actually upping that. 1% is just not going to cut it. DG, you said that these are seeds that are planted. I want to caution that if the seed is planted along the path that's going to be trampled upon, it's not going to grow. If the seed is planted upon rocky ground, it will not take root. If the seed is planted amongst the thorns are going to choke it. But if the seed is planted upon fertile ground, it will bring forth fruit, 30, 60, and even 100% return on our investment. Thank you.
Member Webster, we'll just go straight all the way until Member Mkutu.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the DMs, the Minister, and the DG for the presentation, specifically for taking into consideration a lot of the recommendations that have been brought by the committee to the executive. So I have a couple of, maybe one is just as a start, a comment, which is around the fact that in this APP in particular, while I think there's a lot that we're seeing that aligns, first of all, obviously with the seventh administration's priorities, but also, like I've said, with some of the recommendations that have come from this committee, there is a sense that there isn't enough of a kind of framework that speaks to how we track the development. Even in some of the, we're not able to see what are the outcomes and outcomes, what are the timelines that we're looking at for delivery on some of this. So this is just a general, throughout the programs I picked it up, it's just a general comment in terms of how we're going to track this, how we're going to monitor this, and what outputs are we looking for at the end of the period. And that's something I think we need to really engage on. Even when you look at, for instance, the issue of governance, not seeing enough of how will the institutions, we've seen some of the challenges with the institutions that are in the DTIC, and maybe not enough of how are those going to be tracked in terms of their turnaround, and even the developing or the development of a governance and oversight framework. We don't have a target for that governance and oversight framework. We don't know what the timeline looks like for that. And then my second comment is going to be around trade. And I think I, for one, really welcome the focus on the AFCFTA. In all the engagements that we've had, it's been very clear that this is a priority for the Department of Trade and Industry, and I think it's the correct one. But just to ask in terms of other opportunities that exist, I was in Russia last week,
with a number of other BRICS countries. And, you know, the chair pointed out not so long ago how disappointing it is that the alliance is informal as it is, but it exists and it's an alliance and there's opportunities there. I think my question is around whether there's consideration about some of the agreements that we have there, opportunities. Political developments have meant that there are actually opportunities that exist for us to strengthen some of those opportunities that sit within those countries. So a question around that, because it's also a conversation we've had in this sitting or in this setting before around BRICS and what can be done with trade with those countries. And then the third is around investment and spatial industrial development. Of course, I welcome a focus on special economic zones and seeing how it is that we can get better returns on those investments into special economic zones. And your mention of the townships and industrialization of townships, which is great. But I think, again, we don't have a very clear timeline for the implementing of the proposed model that we see there. And not really clear targets, particularly when it comes to job creation, particularly in the master plan sectors. We don't have targets in terms of what is the job creation, what is the targeted job creation that we intend to have, and actually how do you then monitor socio-economic impacts in terms of those investment initiatives that we have in those areas. How do we monitor that? How do we know that there has actually been impact socio-economically in those areas that we're now saying we're going to target? The last one is similar to something Honourable Trim raised. It's around the issue of triple BEE and regulation. And, you know, there's an engagement that we had with the triple BEE Commission, and they had I mean, it was clear to us, but they'd also raised the issue of the need for enforcement. How do you enforce some of the legislation? And it was very clear that that needed legislative amendment. And for me, that doesn't come through in the revised APP. How do we make sure that there is a way that that commission can become more effective? And they can't within the current legislative framework. So is there consideration around legislative amendments when it comes to that? And then lastly, on transformation and competition, are there specific sectors that we're deeming critical or that we're targeting when it comes to transformation? Because that needs to be the case, because you have some sectors that have seen some sort of success in terms of transformation, and others that are lagging far behind, but also where there's opportunity. So are there sectors that we're focusing on when it comes to that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member Msezan.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks to the department and the DG for the presentation. So my first question will focus on the challenges, the significant challenges that South Africa faces. I want to focus on point 3 and 4. Point 3 being the demand for South African products is mainly for unrefined mineral exports. I think my first question to these 2 points would be, first to say, maybe clarity really as to how are these global challenges? Are they not challenges that we need to focus on as a country, or how do they relate to them being global challenges versus them being challenges that we must deal with as a country? So perhaps on the first one, the demand for our products mainly being unrefined mineral exports. I think I'm very interested to know what the department has done really to combat this exploitation, because I want to view it as exploitation. And I think it is a general sentiment that if we export more unrefined mineral resources, we, in a way, creating or rather contributing to poverty and unemployment. So I just want to first know what has the department done to actually combat that particular exploitation. And point 4, which speaks to the insufficient customs enforcement and regulatory oversight, which allows for illegal and illicit imports to enter the country. Chair and the department, as it stands, at least 22 young Black African children have died which I think would be linked or attributed to this illegal and illicit leeway of imports into the country. So on that note, well, it's not just obviously that, but there's a number of other products. There are illegal, not illegal rather, but fake products such as alcohol, fake cigarettes, fake clothes, and a number of other, I think, products that we can speak to, which don't only affect the manner in which we can generate revenue or economy for the country, but a number of other factors. So what implementable measures does the department have to combat this, which I think would be my question on that particular point. And then obviously I noted the 3 strategic priorities for the 7 administration and the pillars of success for the medium-term development plan. I think on that one I will not ask the question, but just I did quite note and then go through it, even though in terms of the programs that then follow, I would assume that they speak directly to how that is going to be implemented. But then on program 6, that speaks to incentives, I think that would be on page 19. I think this would have been raised at some time before. On the 6,000 jobs that have been created, really if we could be given something that is a breakdown that actually speaks to, are these long-term jobs or are these contractual jobs that were created and on that particular slide. And the DG did touch upon transformation and competition question that I wanted to get clarity on, but I think I still need further clarity on the implementation of the 100 billion transformation fund. I think the first bullet would have spoke to pledges, investment pledges at the amount of 15 billion thus far. So I think I would want to know if that particular transfer, because at the very same slide it speaks about the concept having been approved as yet. I think it would be the column, the last column on that very same point. It says the concept has been approved. So I just want to understand if this actual trust fund is already implemented, is already in place, and seeking is busy seeking or trying to get funding, or it's yet to be implemented. I think I want to also echo on the question by Honorable Webster, which I had also noted. Just clarity on the implementation of the triple BE to achieve a 60% black-owned in critical sectors. I really am interested to know which critical sectors, or does the department identify to be critical sectors to be black-owned? That's one. And obviously, I would really want to know at what percentage are we standing currently? We are at 2024 with that target of 60% by 2029. Where are we currently standing or where is the department currently standing in terms of implementing that before we can actually see if that particular target is feasible to achieve? And then I think finally I want to speak on the last point that was presented by the DG around shelf space. I think if I would have captured correctly, the DG mentioned that they've engaged or been engaging SPARE amongst other retailers. So DG and the department, perhaps if we could, on the utterances that you made around certain players, new players having been granted opportunity of shelf space in a number of retailers, if we could perhaps just get that breakdown of especially those that are still in the market, that are still have that current shelf space, and maybe big retailers that the department intends on engaging, because obviously I think I would be very, very interested in knowing, particularly as a country, I know that we are big in agriculture. So I would want to know which big players wants to absorb our new players in the market, the domestic market, or the domestic service providers. In this case, obviously, they'll be providing their products. Yeah, no, I think, Chair, I'm covered. Otherwise, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Member Mdluli.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the acting DDG for the presentation. It was very insightful. However, I do have a few questions of clarity. I'll start with slide 3, for example, in strengths, where it says internationally competitive agro-industrial food and autos value chains. That's good, but I want to raise something with regard to the sugar industry. As we all know, the sugar industry is taxed. There's currently a sugar tax, and that's affecting the industry a lot. Under Patel, there was some sort of communication from the department as to where it lies on the on the sugar tax matter. So, if you want to ensure that there is an internationally competitive agro-industrial food and autos value chain, well, especially for food, I think we need to communicate more clearly, to show our position on the sugar tax, which I think the department is against, if I'm not mistaken. But if it's not, I mean, I will be taking it up to ensure that it's scrapped, because I think that it is affecting the industry, and it's something that we should be tackling. So just to move to also slide 5, it says here AFCFTA under opportunities, rather. Market for food, autos, mining, equipment, financial services is massive. So can you please explain the financial services part of it? What does that mean? And also, because the National Treasury tends to get a bit anxious, when us who serve in trade, industry, and competition touch financial services, is there going to be like some sort of working relationship with with the National Treasury, just to avoid any tension and that sort, because they do tend to get very touchy. And yeah, I just want to get more clarity on that. And slide number 5, under investments, stimulus, you mentioned the ease of doing business, which is good, and then you mentioned new mines. So does that mean that the DTIC will be funding companies that are that are exploring new mines, or I just need more clarity on that as to how it intends to stimulate investments in that front when it says new mines. And I'm just going to step back a little and touch on AGOA. I know that wasn't mentioned here, so I just want to bring it up. As you all know, the US has a new change in leadership, with Donald Trump coming in. So what is the department doing at the moment, given this change in the US's leadership, to ensure that AGOA remains intact? Because I've seen some key members of the Republican Party, commenting about South Africa's trade and that kind of stuff, and I am getting a bit anxious with regards to that. So, what are you as departments doing now? Because I've seen before, for example, a EU minister have spoken very strongly about the need for us to to have AGOA, but now given this change, I just want to get more clarity as to what the department's doing. And then slide number 12. Slide number 12, it mentions here under the strategic focus areas to mobilize 2 trillion over 5 years to attract investments, which is good. But I just want to gather, what are the time frames rather that have that you've put to ensure that the 2 trillion is mobilized? Because I mean, it's easy to say between 2024 and 2029, but I mean, along the way, how will you track that progress to ensure that that goal of 2 trillion rand is achieved over the 5-year period? And I see here that you mentioned the permits to expedite them, licenses. So you are making sort of how can I put it? You are making progress on the red tape issue, though I'm still a bit concerned with rather about the BEE matter. And I do agree with you, acting TDG, that triple BEE hasn't been adequate, in addressing the inequalities that black people face in the country, as well as colored individuals. And I think that more should be done by the department. And about the BEE fund of 100 billion, I mean, I don't know what to say about that. It's making me anxious because we're throwing money, but are we going to see the results? So. Also with that, I think I need more clarity on that fund, because it's easy to just throw money, but because we've seen over the past few years that the department is getting a lot of money, but has that money been adequately utilized to ensure that we achieve our objectives? So merely throwing money at the problem won't really necessarily solve the problem of racial poverty and inequality, but we'll see. We'll be keeping eyes on that. And slide number 22. Okay, I already touched on that, slide number 22, and yeah, that's round about it, really. I think there's nothing more on my side, but that's rather about it. I just have one more question with regards to slide number 23, transformation and competition for financial year 2024-2025 outputs. It says here by, so 2024-2025, it says 200,000 job opportunities created through transformation and competition interventions. So are those the jobs that have been created so far, or are those the jobs that are yet to be created in this financial year? Thank you. As well as the 10,000 additional work shares. Thanks.
Member Chance.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the DTIC for your presentation. Yeah, my honourable members to the left have made quite a few interesting comments. I'd just like to add a couple more. The first thing really goes to the issue of the DTIC's impact as an organization, as a department. And obviously you have lofty ambitions to be the leader of industrial policy, and also not just industrial policy, but economic policy, which means obviously you have to bring on board the Treasury and other departments. And that poses a question around the ability of your department to influence the things that you are talking about that are needed to stimulate growth in this economy. And I'm talking about mining, agriculture, energy, transport, logistics. And it's quite significant, the fact that the Operation Vulindlela 3 priority projects have nothing to do with the DTI directly. They're transport, logistics, energy, and crime and corruption. So if you were to knock on Treasury President's door and say, Mr. President, we need X that is under our purview to be the next Operation Vulindlela priority, what would that be? It may be an unfair question because you are obviously cross-sectoral, across the entire economy, but I'm still interested to know what would be the most transformational intervention that you would expect to drive growth to the greatest possible extent, based on the role that the private sector are playing in this domain. With the presidency and Treasury. Then I'm concerned, I have to say, that you're doubling down on 2 policies which are at best questionable and at worst downright ineffective, and that is beneficiation and localization. Now, beneficiation is just a fancy word for manufacturing. Let's be honest about it. The difference being that with beneficiation, you're moving the factory closer to the mine and away from the market, which in itself introduces inefficiencies and distortions, because actually it's cheaper to move the raw material to the market than it is to move the finished goods from the mine to the market. So I'd like to get some detail on what this actual beneficiation strategy looks like. Okay, we've talked about catalytic converters taking platinum and turning it into catalytic. That's fine, but what are the actual industries? What are the end products? Because products are complicated things. They involve multiple inputs from multiple sources. Some are imported, some are made locally. So I'd like to know, what are these beneficiated products? What minerals that we take out of our ground are going to be turned into what products? That's the first thing. The second thing is that we've got this concept in finance of stranded assets. And we have a potential problem of having stranded assets in this country. Coal is obviously one of them. But I would argue that our biggest stranded assets is our human resource. we have 8 million people unemployed. That is a stranded asset. It's 8 million people doing nothing. And so I'd like to know what the department, or does the department see any role for it in releasing these stranded assets into the economy and bringing them into the economy through any form of economic activity, whether they be high-paid, low-paid, whatever sorts of jobs. And does it see its role as being strategic in in leveraging these stranded assets? 8 million people who are doing nothing at the moment and all potentially have skills. The other thing is localization. And there's an inherent, in my view, there's an inherent contradiction between your strategy for localization on the one hand and your rationale for wanting to grow exports on the other. And the rationale for growing exports is because the local market isn't big enough to absorb products that at competitive rates, prices made by local manufacturers. So if you're doubling down on localization, all you're doing is putting up prices because these guys can't make the things competitive enough. That's why they have to export. So I'd like to just understand why you still have this obsession with localization as opposed to an absolute laser focus on exports. Now, I'll talk about a meeting I had yesterday, which is very illustrative of industrial policy generally as it pertains to one particular sector. And I know that you've had meetings with this crowd recently, the Association of Electrical Cable Manufacturers. And they came to me because they said, we are being devastated by cheap Chinese imports. And the fact is that this is an industry which turns over 11 to 13 billion rand a year. It employs 5,000 people. Imports represent about 4 billion rand. And currently there is a 15% duty on these products that are coming into the country. And this organization is going to be asking for duties to be raised to 35%, which of course is going to raise prices. But the cause of their distress, and I'll just list what is causing their distress, and I think that these are replicated through many, many industries in South Africa. Number one, low domestic investment, which means that there is a low demand for their product. People are not buying enough electric cables because government is not investing and South African private companies are not investing. Infrastructure investment has declined. Number two, there's a small local market. There just aren't enough customers out there to support these manufacturing companies running at full capacity. Number three, cheap imports. I've already referred to the Chinese imports, but not just China. China, Portugal, Italy, India, all of whom have more competitive industries and are able to supply products more cheaply into this country. Fourthly, insufficient focus on exports. When they gave me their presentation, they didn't mention exports once, and it turned out that only about 20% of their product is exported. Number six, high compliance costs. Sorry, number five, high compliance costs. So roughly 11% of their total cost base is compliance. That's a shocker. So, this is just an example of why your focus on reducing compliance costs and red tape is critically important. And then the sixth thing, which is extraordinary, is the DTI's incentives for new entrants into the market. So here we have two companies, one in the Dubai Trade Port, sorry, not the Dubai Trade Port, and one in Crown Mines, which had a 400 million rand investment from the IDC to make wire, which a couple of years later went bust. 400 million rand of IDC money down the drain. And another one, 68 million rand of IDC money also went bust. In other words, incentives to companies into an already overtraded market, probably brought about by sweetness deals somewhere along the line between the investors and the sponsors and IDC. I don't have the facts around that, but certainly the indication was that there was some sweetheart deals. So, this is an example of a sector that is undergoing huge stress, and it's indicative of how industrial policy has not really helped get them out of the hole that they find themselves in. Then I want to talk just quickly, Chair, I won't be long. If we take BEE, for example, now enterprise supply development spend by the private sector is probably 2.5 times your department's entire budget per year, 25 billion rand. And it wasn't mentioned once in this presentation. You know, in terms of leveraging private sector investment, how do you intend as a department to work with your combined resources to make that more effective? And one of the biggest criticisms of ESD is that it's money that doesn't stick to the wall. It's thrown at the wall, but it doesn't stick. So what are the measures of the return on investment? And your BE commissioner should answer those questions. That's one of the things that he should be doing. What are we doing to maximize ESD expenditure? My colleague on the left talked about the 100 billion rand transformation fund. Where's that money going to come from? We need some detail on that. Then, although you didn't bring it up in the presentation, much has been made in the last week of the Township and Spaza Shop Fund, 500 million rand. Apparently 350 million of that's coming from your department and 150 from the DSBD. That's not mentioned in this. There's no reference to it in the budget adjustments that the CFO described. So I'd like some answers on that, please. Then, on the commercialization of hemp, I'm expecting a response to a letter that I wrote to your department, responsible for the agricultural production support scheme. And it's quite extraordinary. There was a company in the Free State that applied for this scheme to build the hemp value chain. And the response that came from the department said that we can't support it because these are the industries that are supported, which hemp doesn't qualify for. One of the industries was the fiber manufacturing process. Now, hemp is a fiber. So, you know, that's just a small example, but it may be, again, indicative of the sort of narrow thinking that needs to change within the department. I'm waiting for the answer to that letter. And then, just finally, again, the obsession with master plans, to me, is a problem. Because a sector isn't necessarily a reflection of the dynamics of an economy, because there's lots of activities that happen between sectors. And would you not think that it would be more helpful to look at value chains as a way of unpacking how the economy works and where to drive your incentives and your activities, as opposed to sectors? Because the thing about a sector is that they tend to be dominated by large players that want to build programs that support themselves at the expense of other players in the sector. But if you were to look at a value chain as a mechanism for determining where to impact, you might find that there is a better return on that investment. But anyway, that's just a few points from my side initially. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Member Kigab.
Thank you, Chair. My apology to the committee for late arrival, though I had submitted an apology prior. Chair, I want to thank the Minister and the Department for the presentation. I think we welcome the revised and more focused APPs. Just a few issues. One, on the clean audits, why are we unambitious? You know, I would expect that we would say we want 100% clean audits. That seems to me like it's not even an ambitious target. It actually is what should happen. 100% clean audits, mindful of, you know, of the management and other governance challenges these entities are facing. But nonetheless, we expect nothing less, because now if you say 56% clean audits, who is the other 44% who mustn't have clean audits? And why mustn't they? I think that's 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 the first question. In terms of procurement, what is our target with regard to procurement from locally manufactured products? Thirdly, in terms of trade with Africa, in lieu of the decarbonization green economy shift, the question that I think we must answer is whether we will have a market for our products, or will we find our products only destined for Europe? And whether we will have a market in Africa for our products, or whether we'll find our products only destined for Europe and North America. And what impact it might have on our desired promotion of intra-Africa trade, intra-regional trade. If you look at, I think one of the things, and that's why I support the target on research, the program on research and producing a knowledge-driven economy, because we've got to look at how and why Asia, for example, has been able to achieve such a robust intra-regional trade compared to any other region in the world. It's expected to, intra-regional trade in Asia is expected to soar from $6 trillion in 2020 to $13 trillion by 2030. I think second to intra-Asian trade will be intra-European. And Africa trails right at the back, obviously because we trade in primary commodities, and there's no point selling coal to Botswana. They have their own. But why is it that these other regions have been able to increase intra-regional trade? It's mainly because of manufacturing. It's mainly because they produce goods which are needed in their regions, and they've studied what their regions need, and so how they respond to their domestic markets. That's in addition to opening up movement in those regions and various other factors. Now, for us in Africa, if intra-regional trade in Africa is a target, what target is it, and what do we intend doing to promote intra-regional trade on the African continent? Now, going to incentives, what's the proportion of support for all sectors, just to understand over the MTF how we intend to provide incentive support to other sectors, whether we intend in the coming APPs to include targets in that regard, including incentives for exports of value-added products. Because the issue that we keep raising of coordination, this department has got a huge responsibility in that regard. And we understand the dilemmas and constraints, but we would still want to see the department playing that role of facilitating that coordination. You speak at the beginning of macroeconomic policy balance. It requires coordination because all other factors don't depend on you. Monetary policy lies outside, even fiscal policy itself lies outside. And so you've got to play that role, mindful of the fact that other departments and entities feel like bulwarks in their own right and may be obstinate. So the issue is, what incentives do we, what's the target and proportion that we intend providing for all sectors within our portfolio, including to promote the exports of value-added products. Going back to the question of decarbonization, are we not worried that we might be entering a new era of a new debt trap, given that the transition fund it does not come free? And even when it's promised for free, there's something you're going to give up in terms of your sovereignty and other things. And so for countries like developing countries, are we not envisaging a new debt trap? And so how does South Africa react in terms of developing its own capability to transition to a decarbonized economy without finding itself offered all sorts of loans by the multilateral development institutions? When it comes to investments, one of the things we would be keen to know is what should be the ratio, or what's our aim in terms of unlocking domestic investments vis-a-vis FDIs? It's not, the two are not mutually exclusive, but also we must not shroud them under one cloth, so that we find ourselves eventually sitting with foreign direct investments far exceeding domestic investments, or domestic business not unlocking their balance sheet, not opening up their pockets to invest in the South African economy to create capabilities here. So what are the targets? Do we have targets in that regard? With regard to industrialization, industrialization is costly. And we've got to bear that in mind. I mean, otherwise we should just have a Department of Trade and Competition. Just ignore industry, because industrialization is costly in terms of investment in creating human and industrial capabilities, in terms of administrative and other bureaucratic costs, and so on. But any country which has ambitions should embark on it and bear the cost. So I think we support the sentiments emerging from the APP in that regard. You know, just Honorable Chance talks of beneficiation, that he says it might just mean moving production centers closer to the mines. But it could also mean, and that also might not be bad. You know, if you go to Tabazimbi, where the center of the campaign is, the only real economic activity in that area is mining, and not even agriculture, but game farming. So everybody else there depends on government, because mines are not going to employ everyone, game farms are not going to employ everyone. The rest of the people who are not employed in those centers must either leave Tabazimbi to go seek employment in Rustenburg and in Brits and so on, or they must fight to become councillors, fight to get tenders, disrupt provision of water services in order. Because if government can't provide water, then it means I, as an entrepreneur, must provide that water. And therefore, if government provides water, I must go sabotage the water infrastructure. So it might not be a bad idea to move production centers closer to the mines, but that's not the only thing. It could also mean coordinating with state-owned companies and the private sector to be able to move the primary commodities to the production centers wherever they may be located. So there are various views to look at it, and there are various things which I think we need to try and achieve. Obviously, that doesn't depend on you only, but I think that we've got to take that view that we should support localization, we should support beneficiation, precisely to ensure that we create this inclusive economy, because what South Africa cannot do is to continue relying on the export of primary commodities that really cannot be all that we are. A country as gifted with natural resources as we are, with a population that's growing, in a continent that is growing as fast as ours is growing, with ambitions that we have, has got to think differently. And we've got special resources under our earth. Very special. I mean, coal is just but one of them. But we've got other very special natural resources that we have. And I think we need to take a view that we will support localization and beneficiation and take into consideration all the concerns that are being raised, not only about congesting around the mining centers, but also providing infrastructure networks that ensures that thing. That which I want to say. The two final points, Chair, one final point, Chair, as I always trick you. And also we must bear in mind that such has many positive externalities. I'm talking about beneficiation, localization. It's got many positive externalities that we need to take into consideration as a country. But the final point, Chair, is with regard, the Spaza Township Fund provides an opportunity for us to rethink and, as our children would say, rejig the township economy. The idea that in the township your main economic activity is a hair salon, a spaza shop, and car wash. Here we are being presented with an opportunity to say, okay, this fund is for now to respond to an immediate crisis. But the committee has been raising the issue of the coordination of the township economy. There is a lack of a national strategy. Department of Rural Development has its own strategy, DTIC, National Treasury, everyone else does. But how do we address the opportunities to transform the entire value chain of the township economy and use this fund not only as a once-off event, but on an ongoing basis, and achieve this work with other entities that will ensure that our townships become vibrant areas of activity, to encourage them even. So there are shopping centers and malls that are emerging all over the townships. But look at your Inc. area, that area around KwaMashu, at the center of KwaMashu, Ntuzuma, and Inanda, which even has a rail network, although it's not being effectively used. But I think we need to begin to rethink the whole township economy sector and how we can transform value chains and bring more vibrance in our townships. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Mkut.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Chair, I think my colleagues have, by and large, captured some of the points that I would have wished to make. Let's welcome the the revised APP, more so its sentiment towards some of the issues that we're raising about the structural transformation of our economy and building an economy that has sufficient capacity to grow. But let me say, Chair, that my confidence levels or optimism levels have been reducing over time. And I guess this is consistent with the point that Honorable Tring has made, that as we are planting this seed, the material context around some of these discussions that we're having in this room further constrain some of the ideas or the plans that we have. More so, Chair, when I was listening to the medium-term budget speech, my optimism took a dive. My optimism took a dive, particularly because if we are speaking about stimulating an economy, and on the one hand, there is an onslaught in relation to ensuring that public investment is reduced. Of course, we can have a debate about the commitment to increase investment on infrastructure. But if the overall capacity of the state, its capacity to project its future, invest on it, is cut, then you are effectively limiting the capacity of the state in the first place. So as much as I accept and I'm very excited about the sentiment of this revised APP, but the material context or the external factors relating to the success of this APP really make me to be worried. My colleagues have raised the issue of monitoring and tracking. I'm not going to belabor it. I don't, Chair, get a strong sentiment in the revised APP in the relation of our firmness and commitment to transforming the structure of our economy. And when we have this discussion of transforming the structure of our economy, it's almost as if we're kicking the can down the street, you know. It's another discussion that we should be having as we get to the can down the street, whilst we ourselves are kicking the can. And I'm saying I don't get that sentiment. And I do want to make the firm commitment that we support the target around BBBE. It's not a question whether we feel like doing it, but history demands that we intervene in a manner that seeks to bring those that are marginalized in the center of economic participation. And these interventions are part of those important interventions. I'm worried, though, again, about the instruments that are available to us to ensure that we monitor, we regulate this work. And from the budget that is presented, if you look at regulation, and maybe Honorable Kikaba, we need to have a discussion about the role of regulation in relation to transforming the economy. And if you are least budgeting for that instrument of regulating the economy to achieve a particular end, and that is to transform the economy, are you not being counterproductive? Again, transformation, the budget is a bit worrying. And maybe this is where I get that there's no strong sentiment, because you back up your talk by resource. and where you direct your money tells us your commitment. And so I think that for me, that is why I thought that I don't get that strong sentiment. Again, I don't get a strong sense of the coordination of and the role of our state-owned entities in relation to the APP, the revised APP. I would have thought, Minister, that that coordination of state-owned entities, I think we had this discussion with DM in one of the portfolio committees, Godlimpi, in relation to exposing the balance sheet and the investment trends within the SOEs to the market, so that we are able to channel investment or rake in investment through that exposure in sectors that we think, one, have a capacity of being labor intensive, but also have the capacity to grow the economy and are more impactful. And I think that kind of strategy for me, as we were debating it, I thought that it would have came out strongly in the revised APP. And I've not got that sentiment that there is a strong willingness to coordinate that work as DTIC with our state-owned entities. Comrade, Honorable Kikaba, Honorable Kikaba would have raised the issue of incentives and the allocation of incentives in different sectors and what does the picture look like. But I would want to take it further because, in a sense, those incentives can resolve the skewed sector allocations in the economy. Because in a sense, if you can say we want to grow, for instance, Honorable Kikaba, kukutyiwa pai ndawo kuthiwa kusetyiweni iyazikhulela iyaziphumela nje ityuwa pha. But laa tyuwa akho mali ifakwa ku-auto sector imali kakhulu. But if you are deliberate about your incentives, you can say you want to grow this tyuwa and integrate the community. Therefore, we must incentivize entrepreneurs who want to participate in this tyuwa harvesting. So I'm saying incentives, in a sense, can become, in your own words, a seed for growing a particular sector. And I think we then need to be deliberate about how we distribute our incentives. And when you grow that sector, which is less saturated, you have a window as well to diversify participation. So I think the incentives as an instrument of transformation, at least that are available to us, they're very important, CFO. I'm glad that the minister, we had a long debate around the issue of trade agreements and how do we review these trade agreements, particularly to position ourselves now as producers, not as people who consume. And I think the reviewing these trade agreements also give us that window to say, now that we're positioning ourselves as people who are going to beneficiate and create and build local industry with the intention to export, how are these trade agreements positioned in relation to that mind in end? So I think that is very important. My views are well known on the issue of green economy and decarbonizing. I think I've canvassed them whenever I speak, I take a public platform, that we might as well be following a growth trajectory of developed countries without sufficiently exhausting our carbon base to drive ourselves to a high level of growth and development through these fossil fuels. Because these developed countries have used fossil fuels to industrialize. Now, when it comes to us, transition. But so, and I agree with Honorable Malusi Kaba that we have precious minerals in this country. Some of them we have not discovered. And the base of our economy now rests on fossil fuels. And we've got to use it to the last straw to develop our economy and to push our economy to higher levels of productivity and competitiveness. I think Honorable Malusi, on the matter of beneficiation and localization, captured my views correctly. But safe to say that the issue of beneficiation and localization actually wants to resolve the very same issue that all of us are concerned about, and that is the issue of job creation. Because the nature of some of these FDIs don't have the sufficient capacity to create employment at massive levels. But when you speak about beneficiation and localization, but also to add another element, and we must not be scared to add it, and that is the protection of that local industry. And regulations plays a very important role in that regard. So I think it really helps us also to escape this so-called notion as if it's a natural phenomenon of we're in a low growth trap, everyone in government, low growth trap, as if it's a natural phenomenon. It's not a natural phenomenon. Actually, we must take bold decisions to get out of that low growth trap. As if it's God-given. Why in a low growth trap? Why in, you see that this one doesn't even know what is this low growth trap. So it's not a natural phenomenon. And we need bold actions to act against it. And if it means we must take, at times, even worse decisions or bad decisions. And Honorable DM Kodlimpi, in one discussion we were having, he asked a question which I thought was very important. What are these bad decisions that we're prepared to take to get out of the situation that we're in? And it's a very important question, but it needs boldness. Doesn't need you to ask it and fold your arms, Honorable Zulu. We must be prepared to take those bold decisions, those bad decisions. Again, I would probably, as a parting shot, the issue of spatial planning. And again, it comes to the issue of channeling this investment in infrastructure, these incentives, in areas outside the so-called metros. Because if we're going to reverse this special apartheid, special planning, we've got to be deliberate about where we find value, decentralizing economic activity into Bizana, into Lisikisiki, Kobo, and Mlazi, so that we are able to create economic value where our people reside. And so special planning is not really about going to build a building, but it's about creating economic activity there, and that means that we must be directed in how we invest in our investment strategy, in the businesses, kind of businesses that we're investing in. And those businesses now must begin to shift away so that we create new economic nodes outside of the metros. We decentralize our economy, outside the trappings of the mineral energy complex. And that, for me, is going to be very important in this administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, honorable members, and your question. I think if we're listening carefully from the what we consider to be something new as a proposal. Firstly, is the industrial policy. The big question is, Minister and the team, is the country ready to finance this? Because it's expensive. Because it's one thing to have a policy, you put it there, but is the country ready to finance the industrial policy? And what are the measures that we are putting in place to ensure that as we move to this higher ambition, there is an appetite from the state to directly finance this industrial policy? That's the first thing. Secondly, is the private sector ready to play? Because it's not government that is going to, actively, do the things that the colleagues are talking about here, beneficiation, localization, and all those things. Is the private sector ready? Do we have enough players who are capable, who can be supported by the state to make sure that they are able to play the role? And then the next question is on the transformation fund, which it's something that we consider new, but 2029 is very far. So it's either we refine it, we have a special fund to recapitalize for the purposes of transformation, and say 10 billion next year, as we say in the APP, in the outer year. Because as one member asked, where will the money come from? So that we're clear that in the first year we're going to have 10 billion. That 10 billion, the intention is to recapitalize NEF to do certain things to pursue the industrial policy and support and transformation agenda. So that we are very clear. Otherwise, it then begins to look unrealistic. It's like we're counting that a minister and the DMs and the portfolio committee won't be here in 2029. It will be after elections. So we can't postpone the inevitable. So we've got to say, what do we do here and now? And I think the third thing that is coming out, maybe that we can say is new, is the beneficiation, especially as far as if we can have a tracking index to it. And we need to agree, and we have some suggestions on what needs to happen. We need to agree on setting up quotas. But before we set up quotas, we must also agree what are these critical minerals that we are prepared to utilize to beneficiate. What are they, and then what are the quotas that we can set? I think that's the next level. And the fourth area is just the ramping up of the SCZ, like the example of South Korea that has been said, that nothing stops us to cover the point that Honorable Member Mkutu always raises, that he is rich, he's got an 8-bedroom house in a village, but he's forced to come and work in the city, and in the city he stays in the shack. And we can't see his richness. So nothing stops us to. So if we ramp up this SEZ, in a village there in Amatole, there will be an SEZ of that product you called. I wasn't so sure whether it's salt or it's what. I got confused. So we've got to agree that this is probably, and are we able to finance this thing? Because this designation of SCZ and so on, it's costly exercise. What is the role of provincial government, of local government, and all the arms of government to ensure that these things can be made to work? The fifth area is around export-orientated growth, which we say has to be balanced, because as Member Chance pointed out, that we shouldn't look as if we're confused. We want growth through export and we want beneficiation. So how do we balance and scale up those issues? Now, at the center of all these things, Honorable Minister and the team, is the issue of coordination. There are many role players. If you expect this only from DTI, even from the budget point of view, it will be impossible. But if there is a mechanism that is almost permanent to coordinate all the role players, the SOEs, the different ministries, and we should be able then to to make a meaningful contribution. Now, what are we pursuing here with all these things, which is probably the primary reason why the committee was of the view that we have to revise the APP. It can't be that we have 8 million people who are not working and we are not clear about job creation strategy. So everything that we are talking about and that we are doing has to result in new jobs, new sustainable jobs. So as we speak, we need to firmly say not just what the DTIC does, but what government generally is doing. What are the jobs that are sustainable that will come as a result of our efforts amongst these things that we're making? And secondly, the economic growth rate. You know, so when I was in the city there, so they kept on showing us, the researchers, Stephen, they kept on showing us that the level of education is very, very low in the metro. So we asked them, so what must happen? When they didn't know, they say, no, yeah. They said, no, but you can't just analyze something for the sake of analyzing it. You must do something. We then said, no, look, let's allocate resources. In 5 years, we took about 10,000 students. All of them, they went through university, they qualified. And we hope that they will continue the league. So when you analyze, so the point is, you can do as much those papers as possible. But if we don't analyze the economy such that we are able to look at areas that are going to produce growth in the main, it will just be an academic exercise. We will be writing researches because we want to expand knowledge, but it's not going to contribute that much. Now, what do we suggest, Minister, so that before you come in, is that probably something like the IMC or anything like that is necessary with some of the key departments, like energy, like minerals, like agriculture, labor, and something like that, where you need to do some work, conceptual, on how, on the approach to prepare the markets. But secondly, to identify some of these critical minerals so that we can know what are we talking about. These things that we must do and do them up and ramp them up successfully. Now, if we can take that route and then have collaborative effort, we do believe that the APP could move us a step or two or three further than where we are sitting. And that's what we want to put before you, and we'll now allocate the next 30 minutes or so for the minister and the team to respond. Those questions that would not be responded to, we suggest that they could be in writing, but generally I think there's a feeling that we are hearing each other. We need just to refine certain things that we've raised even through the research paper that was delivered. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the members. And I'll do just a few comments and remarks, and I'm sure colleagues, deputy ministers, DG and colleagues would be able to elaborate on the detail.
Sorry, Minister. Those who might feel like tea, you can just quickly move in and out so that we don't disturb the flow.
Thanks once again, Chair. I thought I should start with the process issues and hopefully create context to how this APP or revised APP is structured, because there are processes underway that would inform what this government does over the medium term. So the current revised APP is intended to conclude the work as per the approved APP. which had already been adopted, and as you would appreciate, when this administration started, the work was already underway. So you need to continue with that work without any seismic type disruption to the work that the department does, whilst at the same time you enable the APP to set a platform based on indicators about what should happen going forward. It should start doing some of the work that is intended for the medium-term development plan. So in many ways, some of the issues that are being raised are longer-term issues that inform the sort of policy direction that we're taking or should be taking, that should be evident in subsequent iterations of the APP. So from a process point of view, what's intended to happen is that, yes, as we conclude this financial year, we would also be concluding the medium-term development plan, on which basis we would be able to develop a strategic plan for the department or the portfolio over the next 5 years, on which basis we would develop APPs that implement that, so the annual plans that would implement the medium-term development plan. So a lot of the critical issues that are being raised are likely to find expression and or at least constitute part of the discussion about what we should be doing going forward. I thought it's an important statement to make, because then our expectations of this APP will be somewhat moderated, acknowledging that as a result of the medium-term development plan, we will be presenting a strategic plan and the APP for next year that would be reflective of where the 7th administration is striving towards, so to say. But that does not mean that we haven't effected changes in the APP to begin to respond to some of the critical issues. A lot of them came out of the committee, a lot of them also coming out of the MTDP process, because it kind of begins to plant the seed, as the presentation suggests. Another issue that I thought is important to reflect on is the coordination task. And partly the rationale from the presidency included a lot of what members are raising in the committee in assigning us the responsibility to co-chair the economic cluster, because it is to enable that coordination function, both at a political and at a technical level. So we co-chair both the political and technical clusters, and therefore the responsibility to also coordinate input into the economic part of the medium-term development plan. So in many ways, whilst the presidency provided the draft on which basis engagement started, post the initial draft, the department has been more actively involved in coordinating efforts around issues related to the economic chapter, if you like, or chapters in the medium-term development plan. And that has also included, of course, in line with assigning responsibilities to different ministers, stroke ministries, the responsibility to chair and or participate in a number of other coordination mechanisms. So if you're talking about hemp and cannabis, or cannabis in particular, we now chair the Interministerial Committee on Cannabis, particularly because it is now moving towards the commercialization stage. Of course, there are still agricultural and regulatory issues that need to be resolved, but because we're moving towards the commercialization and a commercialization strategy has been developed, we have been assigned that responsibility. But there are also other efforts in coordination that we are active participants in, including the Interministerial Committee on Employment. If it's employment or jobs, Interministerial Committee on Employment, chaired by Minister Metz, that is also a platform from which we are engaging with the private sector and identifying joint efforts and initiatives around that. But ultimately, it all gets to be coordinated under the auspices of the cluster that we are responsible for. There is also some emerging work that in many ways informs some of the issues that come out. So let's talk about critical minerals as an example. Part of the acknowledgement, I think, in the South African discourse on what constitutes critical minerals is that you can't discount coal as a critical mineral when it in fact drives our current baseload electricity in the country. On the other hand, you can't discount the other minerals that would contribute to decarbonization. So in essence, we can't just export our platinum and say we want to be stuck with coal. Everybody else must decarbonize and we'll be stuck with coal. It's not like we don't have the platinum ourselves. So as we talk about decarbonization, it is also about redefining the minerals industrial complex or minerals energy industrial complex, taking into account the broader asset base that we have as a country with regards to our mineral wealth, and some of it underexplored, because there are suggestions that we could in fact have significant deposits of lithium and other related minerals that constitute part of the decarbonization. But also, I mean, we have huge deposits of manganese and other minerals that constitute part of that. So who should beneficiate? Should we take those minerals and send them to somebody else, and we want to be stuck with the coal only? Or should we be part of the game in terms of what future energy, or not even future, but the transition into cleaner energy sources constitute? And all we're saying is that we need to balance this. But it would be a huge risk for South Africa to simply say, well, you know, we're ditching coal and we are only taking green energy, because it would be detrimental to our economy. It would devastate Mpumalanga as a province overnight if we simply just made that decision without it being part of a transition and we think about how we best utilize and exploit our mineral resources. Of course, there are externalities that would influence the direction that we take, and some of those externalities would include the fact that we ourselves are signatories to the Paris Accord, the fact that we have committed in terms of our nationally determined contributions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We've set ourselves targets. And generally, as South Africa, we've always subscribed to the principle of global good governance and the importance of multilateral agreements and their implementation. So both in terms of principle and process, we are bound by that. But there's also the reality that as economies transition, we are beginning to feel the impact. So one of the original equipment manufacturers announces that, in fact, they are closing down their internal combustion engine plant in the Eastern Cape because there's no longer demand in their line of production for internal combustion engines. And they need to create capacity to export hybrid vehicles. It's part of a transition, it's happening, so we can't ignore that it's happening. You already have a plant closing down. And therefore, the people to whom you sell also inform how you yourself behave. And because they are decarbonizing, you need to kind of think about the industries that need to decarbonize. But it's complicated further. By an example such as the green aviation fuel efforts in Secunda, where we have, in fact, the capacity to produce green aviation fuel at Sasol. And in fact, the production line for the green aviation fuel is prepared and ready to decarbonize. However, the reality is that the people to whom we would be selling the green aviation fuel are saying, no, we need you to decarbonize the entire Sasol Secunda plant. Otherwise, we won't buy the green aviation fuel from you. So it's, and of course we're saying, but literally, I mean, these impositions that are coming from, in particular, the EU and others are unreasonable because we can demonstrate that we would be competitive in this regard. And or the example like around green hydrogen that says, well, you know, we have the capability of producing green hydrogen for the export market in particular in the coastal provinces. And there is demand for that green hydrogen. But we also have the capability of utilizing the same resource at the point at which the price becomes competitive to deindustrialize some of our own value chains, or decarbonize rather some of our own value chains. But it doesn't mean that we can't sell the green hydrogen to somebody else. So as we're talking about this green economy, we have the capability to produce, but the price point might be too expensive for us. Therefore, we need to think about it differently. And these things we're going to have to balance continuously, but also accept, as we've been arguing, that the runway is fairly short. If South Africa does not position itself as an active participant in the efforts around deindustrialization, then it would be a laggard. We would follow what everybody else does. Whereas we have opportunity in many instances to position ourselves as a leader and or an active participant in this decarbonization effort. So it's also about positioning that we need to take into account. The last point I thought I should make is around the broader broad-based black economic empowerment issue. The first is to accept that, in fact, we have had significant progress in implementing broad-based black economic empowerment, but we also acknowledge that there are limitations in terms of current legislation and implementation instruments. And therefore, we need to initiate a process of revising both, but we don't have to discard what we currently have. And sometimes what we tend to do is to think that broad-based black economic empowerment is limited to the equity transactions, most of which would be the large companies and or on the stock exchange. But actually, broad-based black economic empowerment extends beyond that. So the acting DG was making the example around Spur and their commitment to increasing black franchisees, number of women-owned franchisees, supporting programs that procure from black-owned farmers, participation in logistics, and so on. It is part of broad-based black economic empowerment because the BBBE Act says that you should invest in enterprise and supplier development, you should invest in skills development, you should invest in social transformation and social development. So when you see a company written BBBE level 1, it means they are doing all these other things. And the beneficiary down the value chain that does not interface with government, they are probably providing services to a mine in Tabazimbi. Those very people are beneficiaries of broad-based black economic empowerment. Or you see managers that hold senior positions and they've been appointed in terms of employment equity legislation. When you see women, black people, young people holding those positions, those are successes of broad-based black economic empowerment policy. But because we don't always talk about them in that way, you don't always reflect on the progress that the legislation is making. What we do need to do is to improve our implementation, including general compliance. There are all sorts of fronting, all sorts of underreporting, and all sorts of problems that there are that we do need to resolve. But part of what we're trying to do with this, and it comes to a point that was raised earlier on in relation to indicators on enterprise and supplier development. So when we're talking about the Transformation Fund, what the Transformation Fund is doing is to aggregate the efforts on enterprise and supplier development and then mobilizing resources from other funding instruments, including equity equivalents and so on, so that you are able to have a consolidated view. Some of it would all fall into the same fund, some of it would still be separate, but have a coordinated and aggregated effort that we make. Meaning, Chair, that implementation will start from the next financial year. So the 100 billion is a target to be achieved by 2029, but it is intended that implementation would start happening. So when you look at the targets for this year, it is to design, to structure the fund, and to model it, but to also mobilize partners that would participate in the fund, so that when you look at the next year, it would translate into the APP in the NEF in particular, because they are one of the lead agencies in designing the fund, but also in other agencies. And part of what we'll be mobilizing is the need for government to comply. Because in fact, many organs of state that are measured entities are non-compliant to broad-based black economic empowerment. Therefore, we're unable to aggregate the overall investment by government that should go into broad-based black economic empowerment. What's important is for us to set proper rules, set proper governance systems, and proper targets, as the committee is saying, so that we can measure ourselves against defined targets. And I think that's what we would be placing emphasis on as we model the Transformation Fund and other initiatives that seek to accelerate broad-based black economic empowerment. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sure the colleagues have more detailed answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Let me start off with the technical issues about basically the APP tracking mechanism. I think that's what the sentiment is about. So one of the things that we insisted on removing as APP targets and indicators is reports. So we don't want an output indicator that says we will produce a quarterly report that tells us how far we have gone in beneficiation. We will still have the quarterly performance management system, which helps us in tracking the targets, but we don't want any bureaucrat to say my performance is measured on a report about working. Of course, everyone is employed to work, so why do you tell us that this must go into your contract? That's why we moved from the 118 to 56. So the 56 are about the core mandate issues, the impact ones. So we do accept the point that we need to have that tracking mechanism, but we will keep on giving you what So the tracking will be actually what we do and come and report about, not that it must come into the APP. So originally you would have it being written there, biannual report on progress in the beneficiation implementation strategy. So we've moved those from the APP to our ops plan. It's the stuff that we will be dealing with internally. So the point is that we do have the tracking mechanism. We just didn't want to add it in here because it builds a bulk document and it doesn't help us to look at the substantive work that we are bringing before you. And then there's the issue that Honorable Tring raises, which I think it also answers in part what Honorable Chance was raising. The balance of trade question. And that's what beneficiation is essentially about trying to help us to deal with. If you look at South Africa's export basket, the bulk of our foreign exchange earnings comes from raw minerals exports. And then if you look at what we pay for, so the outward flow of that foreign currency on the other end is larger than what we are earning. Why? Because we don't produce a lot of things in South Africa. We buy them from outside. And then it leads to that balance of payment problem and the trade deficit problem that we have. So we have no option but to track it. It's work that we do. In fact, so SARS produces that data regularly, and we look at it. We look at what we are selling and what we are buying, and then industrial policy is essentially to try and change that trade balance issue. That's what we are doing. That's what beneficiation is about. Now, I was trying to think about how to handle this thing, Honorable Chance, and how we are framing it. And we've been having this conceptual discussion for months now. But here is the trick. The cost of beneficiation is high. I think it was Honorable Kikaba and the chair who made that point. Because you are building productive capacity from scratch. And what that usually does is that it distorts pricing in the short term. It's true. It's a fact of life. We are going back to the return on investment discussion we had last week. When you think about your return on investment on current expenditure patterns, you've got to be able to discount the short-term cost for the long-term gain. So if we were to argue that we are producing steel in South Africa today, so steel is cheaper coming from China, not because there's some natural reason why Chinese steel is cheaper, but it's because the Chinese have had a 40-year lead period of building productive capacity in steel. So when we were deindustrializing in the late 80s, they were on the come up. So at the back of that, they've been able to shoot down the cost of steel production. And then they can supply the world at a cheaper rate. It's something that we as South Africa have just got to make a point about that. We have to build our productive capacity here and now in order to provide cheaper steel in the medium to long term. So that's the conceptual thing that we've got to sort of settle, that at one point there will be high cost. I think this point was made about renewable energy. I think some of the people who oppose beneficiation, they understood it when it came to investing in renewable energy. They would say, no. So the capital cost for building renewable infrastructure is high, and therefore the cost of electricity might go up in the short term, but it will theoretically fall over time. It's the same point, really. We can debate how valid that is on renewable energy, but the logic is what beneficiation is about. You build now, it will distort the cost and the pricing, but eventually it has to fall if you sustain investment on that front. And the other point that Honorable Chance makes, which again, you were talking about the local cable manufacturers. And you make a point that we've been making about a lot of SMMEs in South Africa. They design their business processes and their market strategy for the local market. They don't think about a wider market. And because you are pitching to a small market, you are not going to be efficient in how you produce whatever you are producing. So part of what the export-led growth strategy is about connecting even South African SMMEs to a wider market in Africa and the rest of the world. Now, the export-led strategy thing and how it goes with beneficiary, it's not a contradiction, Honorable Chance. It's actually resolving a problem.
Sorry, just a point of order.
Okay.
Between export-led
And localization, yes. I'm going there. That's the point I'm making. You said beneficiation is a nice word for manufacturing. That's what you said. And localization is about manufacturing in South Africa. So so all of them, they are tied in that manner. So the idea is, so an argument could be made that South Africa's economy has always been export-led. Someone can make that point. But the discussion is about the quality of exports that you are relying on. So if you go to slide 2 on the presentation where we deal with what are we responding to. No, not slide 2, slide 1, in fact. Slide 2, 3, or whatever, the one that has the SWOT analysis. When you think about weaknesses, so if you read that slide, you will have to read it, the left column and the right column. The best way to understand them is if you read each box with its diagonal equivalent there. So where we say strengths, what you must connect it with is the threats. Where we say weaknesses, connect it to the opportunities. So let me illustrate the point a bit. On weaknesses, we say economic structure that exposes South Africa to volatile commodity cycles. And then we say, on the opportunities, preferential trade agreements, AfCFTA market for food, autos, mining equipment, financial services is massive. The point we are making is, if our export-led growth is only reliant on commodities, then fluctuations in commodity prices affect South Africa's growth performance. But you can solve that by reopening the preferential trade agreements and by leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So you talk about localization, not in the manner of import substitution as such, not just purely as that. You will still have imports. And you are not going to be localizing one for one, for instance. You're not going to say, no, I don't want to buy smart TVs, therefore I'm going to manufacture them here. You will accept that you will import smart TVs if you don't have capacity to build it. But you can then make the point that I don't want to import capital goods, but I also want to export capital goods into the African market. So there's going to be a balance between importation and building local capacity for exports. It's not a 1:1 replacement that we are talking about. It's a bit of a sequenced but rational exercise in trying to basically build employment in South Africa. And this is not a cynical point to make. So we can make it and say, we all know for a fact that when you export an ounce of gold, there's a mathematics that could be embedded into it to calculate the number of manufacturing jobs that you are exporting. There's a calculus that can be made into that. And where you can keep that commodity in South Africa and build employment at the back of it, you will have to do that. Not all commodities, but some of them. And an example is on the battery manufacturing side, because we have a vibrant auto sector in South Africa, which enjoys a particular market share in Europe and the United States. And therefore, at the back of it, you can have a discussion about building battery manufacturing capacity. And that's the sort of beneficiation we're talking about. So you're asking, what mineral and what product are we talking about? That's the sort of thing we're talking about. It's on components manufacturing. on things that go into products that already enjoy a market share. So we're not inventing the wheel anew, but we're trying to domesticate what can be domesticated. And that discussion already exists with the auto manufacturers. And some of them are willing to have that discussion, and they're making arguments about incentives and that they say, if you can help us on these ones to lower the cost of production, we would be willing to come to South Africa. So that's the context of what we were raising in here. The other point was made by Honorable Mkutu, and then I'll get back to what Honorable Kikaba was saying. The low growth trap chorus, and I think it ties to what Honorable Chance was raising about Operation Vulindlela, and what is it that we would want to say to the presidents. So the low growth trap chorus, Honorable Mkutu, is an annoying chorus, but it's one that you can't avoid. Because you are basically talking about binding constraints. The things that, doesn't matter how well-intended you are, if you don't solve them, you will not register growth. So let's think about the electricity thing. When we're having load shedding at its worst, there's no furnace that you are going to run. If you can't keep your lights on, you are not going to grow. Even if you produce whatever goods for the export markets, if you have that crisis at the port, where in order to move coal, you literally had to deal with 1,500 trucks stuck in Richards Bay, the economy is not going to grow. Because the net effect is that you've got to slow down your mining operations, because you can't be mining and not be able to get them out. So that's what the low growth trap was about. What we can discuss is, are we still rational to keep on saying South Africa faces a vulnerability due to load shedding? So someone else could be saying, no, but guys, you've dealt with load shedding. Why do you keep on getting back to it? The point is that, yes, in the here and now, we've dealt with it, but we are not out of the woods as yet. And there is still also the high cost of electricity that has got to be dealt with. Yes, Transnet is improving its performance, but we are not out of the woods yet. So, Honorable Chance, you know this thing of Operation Vulindlela, it has a history in guerrilla warfare in South Africa. The famous Operation Vula. So here is the thing. So Operation Vula was not supposed to deliver liberation itself. It was supposed to set the condition for the return of armed guerrillas who would then do the firing of the gun. And then they would deliver us into Pretoria at the back of the military things with AK-47s waving. So the understanding was always that it will have to be the mass of the people who do that. Now what Operation Vula in this context does, it was actually designed just for the network industries. So to remove the binding constraints. That is why it deals with electricity, logistics, and then it's added corruption and crime. Because these are the things that are binding constraints. So if you were to ask what is the DTIC, what would we want to add into Operation Vula? It would be regulations, some of them, that affect the performance of the economy. One of which is this thing you're raising. You make the point that it's cheaper to export commodities than it is to export finished goods. And part of it is the tariff structure. Our tariff regime is set up such that it's cheaper to transport raw commodities than it is to transport goods, including the preference of allocation on rail lines. It's disproportionately in favor of exporting raw commodities. So what we need at Operation Vula level is exactly to deal with that, the regulatory burden thing. And some of them is what you were saying, the cable guys said to you, that a lot of their costs goes to regulatory compliance. So these are some of the issues that we want to be elevated to that level. They are not going to solve the problem in and of themselves, but they are going to open up the system so that we could improve performance. The MTDPS, Honorable Mgoshu. So So the MTBPS is not an original budget. It is a mid-term comment on an existing budget framework. So I sympathize with your anxiety because I have the same anxieties. Less for me about the MTBPS than the coming budget. I'm more worried about what will happen in March. Because, so I will give them the pass and say, yeah, but the MTBPS, you were commenting on what you said in March. I'm more interested in what they say in March, because that's where we need to set a new MTREF on the basis of the new MTDP. So I see the deflation that you got there, but I thought, you know what, I'm not going to spend much of my energies on this thing. I'm more interested in what we get them to say in March. And I think that's where the discussion must go. Because when you talk to them, they say, no, but we were only adjusting what we had appropriated in March and on the basis of the current revenue framework. So let's discuss so let's take it there then and discuss the new and the minister is making the point that because we are now co-chairing, the cluster, we are also participating in MENCOM, there's another structure that deals with budgeting. And our intention is to try and bring the DTIC's government-wide perspective on the budget program for next year. And hopefully at that level, we can get it done. I don't know where we are missing each other on the incentives plus the spatial transformation dynamic, because I think the APP does address it. So if you go to the figures that the CFO was reading, so actually the bulk of the funding that the DTIC allocates, it goes to the incentives branch. It's here. What we said we will try to do with the Department of DDG, Susan, is to tackle the issue of trying to move some of the incentives away from sectoral concentration. And we made the point that we must try our level best to articulate our disbursement system to all the SEZs. Because, so if you look at what historically we've done, we've disproportionately funded the auto sector, which almost means you funded particular SEZs more than others. So you will have Kucha, you will have Island and NITZ, you will have Tswane SEZ to some degree. Not that they must not be funded, but the argument is that you need to start using your SEZ and your industrial parks framework as your spatial distribution framework for your incentive, so that you deal with all areas in the country in that manner. But again, the point must be made that we are funding this on a declining baseline. And I think this is what the CFO keeps on making, that we've been allocated declining. That's where the March budget then comes into the equation. And that's the battle that we must take, that the DTIC budget has to move from the 9.5-10 billion average to somewhere around 15 billion in the medium term, if we are serious about funding industrial policy. And I think that's the point that even the chair was making. So on that front, we are together. For now, we are making do with what has been available to date. And I mean, the economy is starting to improve as well. So economic growth is still not as good as it should be, but we've gone past the rate hike cycle. At least we've now had 2 rate drops. And if that is sustained and we get improvement in economic performance, then the discussion about what we get will also change a bit. Honorable Gigaba makes, also on R&D we all agree. On the the just energy transition thing, and whether it's going to lead to a new debt trap, it can lead to a new debt trap via many channels, you know. And that point has been debated quite at length about, you are not going to force us into taking loans in the name of decarbonization, because it's double jeopardy, really. You are committing us to debt on the one hand, but you are also killing our productive capacity because you are forcing us prematurely to abandon what we have. So on that front, I think we are together on that debate. And again, on the gross fixed capital formation issue about the attraction of direct foreign investment vis-a-vis local investment. You were Minister of Finance, you know the P500, where local business saves a lot of its money. You must always be worried when the P500 is growing, because it means they are not investing, South African people. So you are correct on that point. But of course, for the longest time, the argument has been, well, government expenditure has also been negative. But fortunately now, for the year-on-year from 2023 September to now, government expenditure has been positively rising. And we are now having a conversation about getting them back on track. So the excuse about energy, about logistics is now being removed from the equation so that they can also come to the party and give us as much as what they can. And again, I'm now glad that the committee at least openly recognizes that the DTIC is neither the presidency nor is it national treasury. So some of the things that we need hinge on coordination with those two centers. But, so the presidency did one thing, it granted DTIC the core chairpersonship of the economic cluster. That was an important one. And we're hoping that we will get somewhere with that coordination, the macroeconomic coordination, so that there is outcomes. I think Minister dealt with the also, the point that Honorable Kigaba made, maybe as a parting shot, was on the Asian experience of robust intra-Asia trade and what Africa can learn on that. I think Stephen would agree we will have to take that up to make that assessment and look at all the issues that are enablers on that front. Honorable Mdluli wants us to discuss the sugar tax.
Yeah, well.
Honorable Mdluli, what we can tell you is that we are in discussion with National Treasury on the sugar tax. We are not going to say what you want us to say here, except that we are discussing it. You will hear about it when we come. On the financial services issue that you are raising, you are correct. There are no borders in public policy. There's no department that can tell us that we can't comment on this or that other sector of the economy. So we keep on commenting about the financial sector transformation issue, regardless of who feels at pains about it. At least both the minister and I have said things that have gotten us into crosshairs with people, but we insist on it anyway. Because industrial policy must be financed, and it can't be financed from the fiscals alone. There are many other instruments that must be activated. So we will keep on pushing and shoving. The AGOA thing, you know, so South Africa's position on AGOA and every other foreign policy related thing is conscious of changes in Washington, but is not obsessed with them. Because our value proposition is bipartisan, really. We don't say we want a Democrat in office or a Republican in office. We make a case to the United States about the need for Africa's collective and comprehensive development. So that story is not changing and won't change. Unfortunately, both the minister and the deputy minister were in Washington, and they spoke to both sides during that period, both the Republicans and the Democrats. That was before the election. And the sentiment we got was positive on both ends. So we are still pretty much confident that that goodwill will remain in check, and we think that we can do well. My last point is on the threat of stranded assets that Honorable Chance was talking about. You know, I think, Honorable Chance, we agree that the real struggle is about optimizing the activity of South Africa's national assets, including labor and our natural resources and our technology. We might disagree on what approach is the best, you know, and I'm not answering the issue about the labor laws, because the DG did mention that we are reviewing even that, what labor laws should apply to what level and what. So part of what the master plans are about, it's not so much that we are not looking at value chain linkages. We are. We are looking at value chain linkages. So when we talk about the sugar master plan, for instance, we're thinking about it as part of the agro-processing value chain, not just about sugar itself. When we talk about the auto master plan, for instance, we are already talking about the critical minerals as well, as part of that value chain. So we do have the sectoral focus for stakeholder coordination, but we do have the value chain one. But that is going to be clearly articulated in the industrial policy framework that the DG was talking about, because that one will be showing how does one master plan fit into another on the basis of the value chain. And that is essentially to try have a robust strategy of rescuing South Africa's assets from being stranded. And you might believe that we are wrong, but our beneficiation and localization, sort of doubling down, as you put it, is to double down on rescuing those stranded assets. And we believe that in order to do that, you need to build that. Let me show an example, for instance, just statistically
DM,
about...
you need to start wrapping so that we can allow the other DM. We're already past our time.
Okay, this is my last point. I'm done. So let's think about the beneficiation issue, just one statistic. So on the iron ore mining side in South Africa, we have 21,000 jobs, just on iron ore. But we have about plus minus 300,000 jobs on the machinery sector, which is tied to the iron ore. That's where the discussion boils down to. If you say we must focus only on iron ore mining and export, then we are guaranteeing 21,000 jobs. And we are losing plus minus 300,000 jobs in downstream. So that's the sort of balance that we're trying to do. It's really statistically sound, it's evidence-based, it's not ideological obsessions. And as I keep saying, we will eventually find each other on what optimal strategy works or what policy works. But the intention is to rescue downstream and build downstream capacity. Because when you export, you are exporting potentially these 300,000 jobs and retaining only 21,000 jobs. If you say that is economic growth, then it will be fictitious economic growth, because you will be getting GDP data on the price of iron ore earnings, but the distributional effect will be you have 300,000 people who are not benefiting from the distribution of that income. So that's the sort of problem that we're trying to respond to. Thank you very much, Chair.
TM.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the honourable members. Yeah, I'm not sure what much more one can add after that. I won't call it a monologue. I will, however, Chair, just be very brief. I think just to Honourable Thring's point about research and development, I think we must talk about it as research, development and innovation, and understand the relationship between RD&I as well as intellectual property and the protection thereof. And so while the Patent Act finds expression insofar as the medical devices, medical industry, it's a much broader conversation about how do we protect our intellectual property in South Africa, understanding that the deindustrialization of South Africa post-1994 is linked to the inability to protect that intellectual property within South Africa. And so nobody, I think, could disagree with your point that we underinvest in research and development and that there is scope for more. But as Honourable Godlimpi mentioned, within what we have available, we have to do what we can. But also to create a culture of research, development and innovation requires a lot of effort in terms of the protection of intellectual property rights within South Africa as we focus on reindustrialization. The other point that I would just make is something that is not often engaged with is the diversification of our economy in understanding better the services sector. So we talk about unemployment, 8 million people, hundreds of thousands of graduates unemployed with skills. For me, that's one of the most unacceptable statistics, where we have low-hanging fruit, where we can employ young graduates in the services sector. And when we talk about services, we're not just talking about global business services, we're talking about engineering services, we're talking about not just call centers, we're talking about software engineers who are developing services and exporting those services, and the relationship between export-oriented growth and the services sector, where we are not where we should be. But there are software engineers in South Africa exporting services to companies all over the world, utilizing our skills which we've produced. And I think there's also a conversation within the department about the skills mismatch within the economy and how we can align the skills a lot better to unlock that opportunity within services exports. Then, just because I know it's between this feedback is just between the committee lunch and a 3-line whip, I will just say that on AGOA, 2 weeks ago, I met the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. The Minister has been on a number of occasions to engage very directly with both sides of the House. AGOA does enjoy bipartisan and bicameral support in Washington. It's not something we take for granted, which is why there's been such a sense of urgency over the last 5 months to engage on the trade issues. I know the Minister has also engaged with Minister Steenhuisen around market access issues on agricultural products. And I understand that the Department of Agriculture is working very urgently to put together a package in order to indicate the seriousness with which we do treat AGOA. I would also just say that the efforts are not just linked to AGOA, but the broader trade relationship with the United States and the importance of building and continuing to build those relationships to make sure that our industries continue to enjoy that preferential trade environment with the United States. So, Chair, just with those few words, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Member Chance.
Sorry, Chair. I beg your indulgence. One other question which wasn't answered, which is the 500 million rand SPASA fund. I think it's important that the committee understands how that's being funded.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. The 500 million, that is actually currently the funding between DTIC and DSPD. From DTIC side, I think the committee will recall, we've been responding to a couple of crises. So our response mainly is on a loan. So it's a cheaper loan at 2%. So we are using the reflows from the Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program, which is an industrial loan administered by both IDC and NEF. So 100 million will come from GSPD through their agency SETFA. Then our 350 million is from the NEF side. Hence, it's offered not as a grant, but as a blended facility. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, colleagues. I think we have deliberated, and there is a sense of optimism from the portfolio committee, and we will now, as advised, be looking at this very much closely in the new financial year, just to make sure that implementation does happen. And we're happy that some of the targets which have nothing to do with economic growth have been removed, so that we hold each other accountable on facts and figures as we move forward. I think the committee generally is relatively happy with the approach, and we want to implore the department and the minister and the team, the deputy ministers, to really let's work harder to get this right, and secondly, get the issue of coordination right, because we need all players to work with the DTIC in order for us to register reasonable growth in South Africa, and we'll deal with the problems that are facing us. With that, I think the meeting is officially adjourned. Thank you very much.